Welcome to the Lifestyle Builders Podcast, Show 9. In our last episode, we chatted on work-life integration over balance. Today is an exciting one. We're talking all about finding your freedom number. Welcome to the Lifestyle Builders Podcast, where we bring you real-life strategies on starting and growing a business and finding financial freedom without sacrificing the life you have with your loved ones. We are your hosts, Tom and Ariana Sylvester, and we are married, we're parents, and we're serial entrepreneurs. This podcast is for those who want more out of life. We'll show you how to take the vision you have and create the business that will help you achieve it. Join us as we share practical steps, real-life stories, and help you become a lifestyle builder.
Freedom. That's what it's about, isn't it?
Freedom!
There we go. I was going to say, we have not had you singing.
No, well, I have to have the opportunity. It has to come to me.
All right, I'm going to start presenting the opportunity, and we'll see if you pick up on it each episode.
Now I got to listen for song lyric options, man.
Yeah, it's keep you attentive. All right, so we're talking about freedom, and you know that's why a lot of people start their businesses, right? Like everyone talks about having financial freedom, having time freedom, and I had always thought about that at a young age. So like I always had, you know, if you go back to a lot of entrepreneurs, they always had some sort of like side business. And oftentimes the reason for having those was because we wanted freedom, right? Because what most people don't realize is that you don't really want more money, but what you want is what more money can get you, or you perceive it can get you.
Yep.
So like when I remember I was in high school, I actually was working 3 jobs at a time.
I remember.
And
after I met you, it was the summer after I met you that you had worked those 3 jobs.
Yeah, I mean, like
fall, I guess.
Yeah, so I was, I guess it was probably like 5 by the time I count them all. But so I was working in a pizzeria, and to get extra time, I would actually come in the morning. They had like an old school like drive-in theater, so I would come in and like clean the theater parking lot, and clean the bathrooms. And then I would work in the pizzeria. Second job, I was actually roofing houses. And then third job, I was working at another restaurant, like as their chef. And then I guess fourth job, I was doing like chicken barbecues, like on the side. But so I was doing all of this because I was between the summer of high school and college, or I guess my senior year. And going into college, I actually didn't want to have any debt. So my goal initially, I don't even know why I had this thought, but it was to not have student loans. And everyone thought I was crazy when I was saying this. And I was like, well, maybe I'll go into the Marines and, you know, that's the way I'll do it. But I knew early on that I didn't want to have debt because that was going to eliminate the ability to have that financial freedom. Ironically, that didn't work. We ended up getting into quite a bit of debt. But, you know, along the way, it really is like doing those extra things, or, you know, spending a little more time, like, you know, to build that income.
For 4 years of college, you came out with a lot less debt than I did.
I did. Yeah.
I think you only had like $17,000 in debt total
compared to your like 52
it was like 50. It was
or
ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I didn't even use my degree, so whoops.
But so anyways, I get the point of sharing all that is, you know, it does take work to achieve financial freedom.
Yes.
And, you know, it might be taking an extra job on, it might be starting a side business like a lot of people are doing, but realize that by doing that extra now, it's going to just enhance your ability to achieve that freedom faster.
Yeah. Well, I think the other problem is a lot of us don't talk. We all know we want that, but we don't talk about why we want it or how we plan on getting there early on.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the reason we got into so much debt was we didn't look at that early on and say, oh, hey, if one of our goals is to have financial freedom and live this awesome life, maybe we shouldn't go into all this debt right now.
And that's a disconnect I think a lot of people have, right?
It's situational. I am in this situation right now, and I want to get to a different situation, so I'm going to do this thing. You don't look at long-term down the line, that one thing is going to pretty much screw you over for a long, long time because you didn't look at big picture versus situational right now.
Well, and most people...
most people don't. I never knew to do that. You're not taught to do that. Not really. And I think that's a cultural thing. That's just our country. That's not how we're raised. That's not how the culture tells us to do things. That's not how society tells us to do things.
Yeah.
It's you live how you want to live at that moment.
And the cool thing now is that there's like our podcast, there's a lot more people talking about this.
Yeah.
So there's this whole like I was one of the conferences I went to last year was called FinCon. It was
Yep,
all about
financial.
yeah, it was all about like financial bloggers and financial content creators, and there was a lot of sessions there, which it was really cool to see around what's called FIRE.
Mm.
So financial independence, retire early or
Yep.
early retirement, and there's a giant trend now, or it's getting bigger and bigger, of people that realize that our grandparents actually had it right. Like, let's not get into a lot of debt. Let's
Save.
let's save. Let's only buy things and live within our means. And I mean, we'll just shout out some of our lifestyle builders. Actually, two of the people I met at FinCon,
Mhm.
Allie and Matt, they actually have like 4 years
Yep.
worth of savings.
Expenses.
Yeah, so they could live for the next 4 years and not bring any income in and be okay.
Yep.
So like I just look at so many people that we work with, and they come to us and they have debt and they don't have savings, and it's really a struggle, and they've got to put a lot of work in because they didn't make those intentional choices early on. Where I look at what Allie and Matt have done, they're young, and because they were diligent and they knew what they wanted to achieve and they took the right steps to make that happen, they've now set themselves up with so many options, not only for financial freedom, but for having time to build their business, having it be a lot less stressful than I think most people make it, because their actions day to day are not in alignment with their long-term goals and the life they want to live.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look at us. That's why it took us forever to get out of debt, because we dug ourselves into a deep hole. And then when we finally realized, hey, this isn't what we want, it took us forever to climb our way out of the hole. And, it's something that we don't want everyone out there to have to go through. So if we can in some way prevent that or help you not to get to that point, then by all means, we want to do that. So,
And if you are in that tough spot, like we were, part of what we're going to share on this podcast, and then probably in some of the follow-up content, is how do you get out?
yep. How do you get out?
Right? Because for us, like what we found, and it's this way with a lot of things, unfortunately, if you go and look at blogs or look for research and real information on like, okay, we all want financial freedom, but how do you get there? And what is the steps? A lot of places don't go deeper than that.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's so many things that we had to figure out on our path that would be so much easier if somebody laid it out, which is what we want to do in this episode, as well as, what we do with like our training courses and some of our other stuff, is really help people understand, okay, what are the specific steps to go from where you're at today to what financial freedom means for you?
Yep. And that brings us to figuring out what your freedom number is.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, we're going to say that there's a married couple and they've got some kids, and one of the spouses is the entrepreneur.
You're talking about me. You're
Yep.
talking about us.
And they want to leave their job. So they need to know, what is the number that I need to either have in savings or I need to make in my business to be able to freely leave my job without putting my family under financial duress. So first of all, the first thing you need to know that a lot of people don't is, how much money do you actually bring in? And then how much of it goes back out to pay for things, and what are those things?
It's crazy, and I mean we've done it in the past too, so we're including
ourselves out.
We're including ourselves in this group. But it's crazy how many people don't know that.
Yep.
Right? Like, people tend to know, well, I make X amount of dollars per year, which isn't even the right number, because
taxes.
once taxes and your health insurance and your retirement and everything else comes out, your number's a lot less. But I mean, most people legit don't know how much money comes into your household every month. Where does all that money go? How does it break out? And then at the end of the month, do you have extra money left over, or are you in a deficit where you're actually going further into debt or borrowing just to live that lifestyle you want?
Yeah.
Like, so many people don't know.
Well, and that's, I mean, in a lot of cases, there's two different people. So there's money coming in from two different sources.
Yep.
And if you aren't pooling your money, if you don't have joint accounts, then you really don't know
Yeah,
how
and-
much money's coming in and going out.
Yeah.
So it's very, very, very important to sit down and say, here's all the money we have coming in from your job, from my job, from the side business, from maybe something else random. what are we spending it on? Where does that money go every month? And then do we have any left over? Like, are we putting money in savings, or are we just spending everything we have because it's sitting in the bank account?
Well-
Now, again, we will call ourselves out. That is how we used to live. And it put us in some very precarious situations, and also was part of what caused so much of the debt that we dug ourselves
Oh,
into.
absolutely.
Because we never had enough in savings to pay for like an emergency when it came up. Oh, well, we'll put it on the credit card and pay the credit card off. That never happens
Yeah.
like you plan, because things come up.
Something else comes
You
up.
keep paying for more things. You never get the credit card paid off because you never actually had that much excess coming in.
And you got a 25% rate on
And
your
you-
credit card.
yes. So you just dig deeper and deeper and deeper, where if you kind of put a pause and say, let's really take a look at what we're spending, what we have in savings, and can we make a plan? Can we put some sort of plan into action of like and I'm going to say the word budget.
Oh.
But we don't want you to look at it as a budget. We want you to look at it as a positive thing that gives you control over your money. Because so many of us are on the opposite. We're controlled by our money.
And I love the fact that you said that, because we didn't do this for a long time, like you said. And, you know, I'm a firm believer that our grandparents had a lot of things right, and we've kind of lost them. Like, one thing.
My grandmother does. She has more money than
That's what I'm
anyone I
saying. Like
know.
that.
But she doesn't live like that.
But that generation knew a lot of stuff, and we've kind of, as generations have shifted, we've gotten into this. I want everything now. I'm gonna go into debt. Like, that's okay. I'm gonna live for today. YOLO, right?
I can't believe you just said YOLO. It makes me think of trolls. YOLO.
There we go. But so I've never balanced a checkbook, or like that wasn't one of the things that we did early on.
I had to learn in high school, I remember, but I
Did
never
you use
actually
it?
used it.
Yeah, and so what ended up happening? We would have so many bank fees because we missed a payment. And guess what? Like, banks make billions and billions of dollars a year off of us doing that, or overdraft fees, right? We
Mhm.
didn't have enough money in our checking account. So now we're in a bad financial situation. Guess what? We're paying more because we overdrafted our account. And guess what? 3 transactions went in that day. So that's $120 that we now had to pay just in bank fees. So there's all these just like, so many bad things come from not doing this. And once we really sat down and figured out, okay, how much money comes in, let's set our budget for the next month. And to your point, the budget was like, okay, we make X amount of dollars. Where do we want it to go?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that like you can't eat out. If that's an important thing for you, work it into your budget and say, how much money do we want to allocate? Like, if we want to go out to dinner every Friday night, let's do that. But that means that somewhere else in the budget,
Yeah.
we're going to have to adjust.
That means maybe you don't go out for coffee every day.
Yeah, so it's not a restricting thing. It should be a freeing thing to say, I'm not afraid of my money. I know how much money's coming in, and I'm telling that money where it's going to go to live the life I want now, but also build that lifestyle that I'm looking for in the future.
Yeah, and that's part of it. I think it's an important mindset shift that a lot of us have a tough time accepting. There are going to be some potential things that you have to give up now in order to live the life you want to live further down the line. Now, I think part of that's the way that we look at things and the way that we perceive happiness and the way that we perceive having the life that we want, and maybe doing a little shift there, because let's talk about the cars. We went out and bought brand new cars 2 years ago. Probably not our best choice. And now we're like, okay, that wasn't the best choice. Let's reverse that. Let's get rid of one of the new cars so that we can actually have more money in our budget to do with what we want. And at the time, in my mind, I was thinking like, oh, we've done so much work over these last years. Now we're finally making more money, and we deserve this. I've always wanted this car, and we deserve it, so we're going to buy it. Did we really need that car? No, we probably didn't. We're just fine with a normal size family sedan.
Yep.
And what I didn't look at the time was, if we hadn't bought that vehicle and put those payments on for the last 2 years, what else could we have done with that money?
Yep.
And now obviously I'm seeing it after the fact, but it's more, if you can get yourself to do that shift earlier,
Absolutely.
you're so much better off than spending all that money on those things that don't really matter, and then figuring out, oh crap, I just added another year onto our runway before we actually hit financial freedom.
Yeah, well, and let's go to that example. Let's say, like for us, the cars don't matter. It's not something that we care about. But let's say you're somebody that really wants a nice car. That's fine. But just look at your overall budget and say, okay, how do I fit this in? And what do I have to do to be able to afford that? Do I cut something else out of my life that I don't value? Like maybe you want a really nice car, but the house or the apartment you live in isn't as important, right? So maybe you don't live in as expensive of a house. Or maybe this is why you're building a side business and you're going to let that side business income pay for your car. Maybe you're not going to leave a job. Maybe you like your job. But it's all about saying what's important to you and then looking at the time and money you have and being very intentional about how you spend that.
Yep.
Because like last week we talked about really your time, right? And how to integrate that. And I look at time and money both as budgets, right? We've got a certain amount of time, we've got a certain amount of money. Let's decide how we want to spend it and be intentional about that.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
all right, let's circle back to the debt because I know that's a big one for a lot of people. And talking about how to even begin getting out from under it.
Yeah. First step is, and this can be scary, especially if you've been avoiding it for a while, is really sitting down and understanding, okay, how much debt are we in?
Yep.
And when we did this, we were 24. We actually had a blog post and we walked through how we got into and then out of debt. We sat down and we had like $235,000 worth of debt when we were 24. And I don't remember if you were working, I think you were still working a full-time job, but you were kind of bouncing around between jobs.
I think it was right before we had the baby.
Yeah, I had just started, or I had been working my like corporate job for a couple of years. But I mean, the amount of money we brought in at that point compared to the amount of debt we had was ridiculous.
Yep.
And that was scary when we sat down and looked at that. It wasn't scary enough for us.
I was in denial for a while.
I was going to say, it wasn't scary enough for us to actually take action because then it took another couple of years until we really sat down and said, okay, we're not going to go into more debt. We're actually going to put a plan together and pay off our credit card and pay off these things. But at that point, to your point, we were like, well, we're going to buy a house and we're going to get married and we're going to do all these things that just spend. That actually delayed us being able to both leave our jobs by several years.
Yep.
So the starting point is like sit down, get all of your debts, get your mortgage, you get your car loans, get your student loans, get your credit cards, any debt that you owe to family members or friends, like get it all down. And basically you're going to organize it. And you're going to say, how much debt do I have? What are my monthly payments that I've got to make on that debt? And then the interest rates. And then you're ultimately just going to put a plan together of here's the first debt I'm going to attack. And then once I get that paid off, I'm going to take all the money I was paying onto the first debt and put it on the second debt. And you just work that plan to really focus on getting out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's ultimately what we did. That's how we paid off all of our debt. We used the snowball strategy.
Yep.
Because we had tried the other strategy first. What's it called? Avalanche?
So the debt avalanche. Yep.
We tried the avalanche strategy first, which is you take the highest interest and you pay that down until it's gone. Then you pay the next highest interest. That takes forever and it's so demotivating.
Well, I was going to say, let's talk about that. So a lot of things, and here's the reality. I'm going to let you guys in on a secret. With business, a lot of stuff is counterintuitive and most people don't do it, and that's why they fail. So when you're paying off debt, your natural inclination is, okay, I have this credit card and it's got a 25% interest rate, but I've got a student loan or I've got maybe a car loan that's got a 2% interest rate. Well, it makes sense for me to pay the credit card off before the student loan because the interest rate's higher.
Yeah, I want to pay less in interest is basically the
But if your
logic.
if your car loan is only a $2,000 car loan, but your credit card is $10,000, logically pay off the car, pay off the credit card because it's a higher interest rate. You're going to save interest over the long term. But that isn't what makes or breaks people paying off debt. What makes or breaks it is getting these small wins.
Yep.
And when you take basically the debt avalanche is high to pay your high interest things first. The debt snowball says pay your lowest balance first.
Yep.
Because you get wins and you start to see that debt go down much faster.
Yes.
And then once you pay off that first loan, then you take that money, you put it on the next loan, you pay that down faster. And it's that momentum and that excitement that ultimately is going to help you stick with it and get out of debt.
Yeah. So basically, to give you guys the very short explanation, the debt snowball says you only pay your minimum balance on all of your debts, your loans, your credit cards, whatever, and then you take any excess you have and you throw it on to that smallest balance. So your card payment might only be $25, but say you've got an excess of $150. Instead of putting that across all of them, you
Yep.
would pay $175 on that smallest balance until you pay it off. So in that one too, like as you're looking at your personal budget, that's where you see where your excess comes in. If you can cut things out for a couple months and say, hey, if we don't eat out for 3 months, we can put an extra $100 on top of that 175.
Yep.
Now you're putting 275 on that card, and it takes much, much less time to pay off that balance.
Yep.
And then you're going to take all of that amount, add on the minimum payment that you had on that card once you've paid it off, and you put it onto the next lowest balance card.
Yeah.
So that was how we started and paid off all of our debt when we started a couple years ago. Was we did the debt snowball, and we little by little, one by one, picked the smallest balance and just paid it off continually until that one was paid off, and then we bumped it up to the next one.
Yeah, well, and so a couple things. One, we did an episode a couple episodes ago about how to get your spouse on board.
Yes.
Now, that was a lot in the context of like starting a business, but that's a critical thing even with this, because sometimes you might have different views on money, views on your lifestyle, and if you're struggling, to get your spouse on board with looking at debt or paying it off, take a listen to that episode.
Yep.
And then use some of those same tactics for this.
Well, and we also Tom talked about it earlier. Dave Ramsey, he has a course called Financial Peace.
Yep.
That is built for couples that are going through trying to pay down debt and trying to get better on their finances. So, if you are struggling to get your spouse on board with like a budget, or, not spending on things that they see as necessary versus what you see as necessary, going through a course like Financial Peace really helps you guys kind of put the bigger picture into perspective. And it has a workbook with it, so you like walk through the activities afterwards and you talk about things, and kind of opens up that communication. So that's an idea of something that you could do if your spouse doesn't seem like they want to really have to worry about the finances, or they aren't on board for a budget or something like that. So
Yep. So final thing, and then we'll move on, because we're probably going to have, some more dedicated episodes diving deeper into debt, because it's a big challenge a lot of people have.
Yep.
But the final thing is we actually used a spreadsheet, really cool spreadsheet, and we'll put the link on the show notes page at tomandariana.com/9. But the spreadsheet basically allows you to put all your debts in, and then it, as a calculator, that basically tells you, okay, based on how much money you're going to put on your debt, here's how much you pay every month. So sometimes it can be a little complicated to do it yourself. So we'll link to that spreadsheet on our show notes page, and I'd highly recommend you guys take a look at it, because it'll help a lot.
Tom's giving away all the goods.
Got to give away all the goods. That's what we do. We're here to help
so
you guys.
We talked about personal budget. You get your income, your expenses. We talked about debt, how to start getting out from under it. Now let's talk about making the plan for you to actually leave a job, if that's your goal. And we're going to call that your runway, because, there's that saying out there. Everyone says, take the leap and you'll build the plane on the way down.
Oh, I hate that saying.
No.
You know what
No.
happens? You know what happens when you build it on the way down?
crash.
Yeah, you run out of runway and you crash. And here's the thing. You hear people say that all the time about entrepreneurship. It's stupid. Don't listen to it. You might have a small percentage of people that worked for, but you don't know all their circumstances.
Correct.
Most
And you've
people
got people
crash.
counting on you. You can't just say,
Yeah.
I'm going to build my plane on the way down, when your spouse and your kids are in the plane with you.
Yeah, and I mean, here's the thing. Like, people talk about entrepreneurship being a risk. It's not. It's about, yes, there's
are
risk.
risks.
There's risk in
Yes.
everything you do. There's risk in staying with your job. There's risk in driving a car. But what you're going to do is you're going to take calculated risk, and you're not
Yes.
going to be stupid. And people that say jump off and you'll build your plane on the way down, that's a stupid risk. You
Very.
can mitigate, and there's ways, and we're going to go through some of them right now, on how to do it in a smart way so that you reduce the chance of your crashing and burning.
Yeah, let's talk about what happens when you crash and burn. You lose all motivation whatsoever
Oh, yeah.
to be an entrepreneur.
You set yourself
rock
back
bottom.
years.
Exactly.
I mean, like there's divorces
Psychologically,
that happen
yeah,
from
that's
this,
such a
right?
bad one.
Money is one of the biggest things that people fight over. And guess what? If you're trying to build a business and your spouse isn't on board, and you just take the leap and you don't like set yourself up responsibly, like, you're really going to have a big impact negatively on you, your motivation, your family, and
marriage.
I mean, yeah, like, so let's not do that.
Let's talk about your runway. All right. So basically, your runway is the amount of time you have if you were to leave your job until you couldn't live anymore. You couldn't pay your expenses.
Yep.
So the best way to build up your runway is to build up enough savings in a savings account to have that available. Or
well, I was gonna say, so let's actually take a step back. So the ideal way is when you're building a side business, your side business actually, you make enough money to cover your expenses.
True.
Because then what happens is you leave your job and you've already covered all your expenses. So there's a game that I always talk about called cash flow, and that's the whole thing. It's basically saying you've got money coming in from a job and you've got expenses, and to get quote unquote out of the rat race, you want to actually build up your side income from investing in real estate or starting businesses to cover your expenses, and then you can quit your job and you've got financial freedom.
Yep.
Right. So that's an ideal way, but what we see for most people is that
it takes a long time.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense for everybody.
Yeah. Well,
so
oftentimes it's you don't have enough time to work on your business to be able to build the business income up to have that amount where you could leave your job. So it's like you're constantly in the cycle of I can't grow my business because I don't have any time. I don't have any time because I still have to have this job. So the cycle never ends.
Yep.
So the runway actually comes into play when we talk about what are the different scenarios in there that you could maybe do so that you could leave your job before your business has hit that income level.
Yep.
And one of them is to build up a savings account to increase your runway. So if your business is making money and you've got a savings account with enough money in it, you can calculate how long you actually have until, in effect, the money would run out and you would have to go back out and find a job or find some other form of income.
Yep.
So that is your main runway. Some people may have enough in savings that it will never run out because their business is making enough money that they will never actually use all of the money in their savings. And in effect, they will eventually be able to grow their business income to match, and they'll have still in savings as well. So that is obviously best case scenario besides your business income being more than enough to leave your job.
All right. So if you're listening to this, obviously we've been through this, so it makes a lot of sense to us, but let's really get down to basics. So there's 3 key variables that we have here, right? So the first one we already talked about, which is your freedom number, your expenses every month. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing you got to know. The second thing you got to know is then how much money are you bringing in from your job or whatever the sources are today. And then, actually, I guess there's a couple. So there's 4, not 3. 4. So then you got how much money your business is bringing in, and it might start out at 0, or you might be bringing in a certain amount, and then you've got savings. And when you go to leave a job, your first scenario is your business makes more than your expenses, so you can leave and you never tap into your savings.
Yep.
The second scenario, which is where I'd say most people go through, is your business is making money, but it's not quite enough yet to cover your expenses. Mm-hmm. So your runway, like you said, is basically when you leave your job, you're going to use your business income to cover your expenses, but then you're going to use your savings to cover that gap.
Yep.
So basically there's a couple different levers that you can pull here. And obviously the more savings you have, the longer you can have that work. Right? Or the more the business income that you're making, the less you need to tap on your savings. So you guys, let me emphasize, this is such a powerful concept. And this is actually something that we went through and made like a crazy worksheet to make this simple.
Tom made a crazy spreadsheet.
And then you simplified it so people could actually understand it. But this is the challenge that a lot of people don't realize is they say, I'm going to quit my job in 6 months. And they don't actually calculate, okay, if I quit my job, how much money do I have to be making? And then how long do I have until I run out of money? Mm-hmm. And when we go through this activity with people, it's really eye-opening to say, hey, I have a year because I did what I needed to and I built savings up.
Yep.
Or, oh crap, I only have a month and a half.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe you want to wait a little bit longer or build up savings or make more money in your business before you leave.
Yeah, because let's talk about it. Psychologically, leaving your job and feeling that win only to have to go back and find another
Oh,
job
it
6
beats
months
you
down the
down.
line is just horrible for your mentality as an entrepreneur to think people see that as a failure. I failed. I couldn't do it. So then you've got everything that comes with that, and you lose the motivation to even do the business. Then you've got to go back to a job, and you feel like you completely failed yourself, your family. So we don't want that to happen to you.
Correct.
So make sure you're building out your runway.
Yeah, and this was, I think, one of the things that ultimately allowed us to make that decision, because I talk about it all the time, but having clarity is one of the most powerful tools in anything you do. And just like debt, like when you really understand how much debt you have, then you can make smart decisions.
Yep.
So this is something that I would encourage anyone thinking about leaving their job to do, is to really look and figure out what is your runway, and then have that conversation with your spouse. What are we comfortable with, right? And the biggest thing that I think too is, as you're building your business, you want to get to a point where your business has momentum, so that leaving your job, that extra time, will allow you to grow the income.
Yep.
What a lot of people do is they haven't really figured out or validated their business yet. And then when they leave, they're trying to validate it while they have this financial pressure to make money. And a lot of times that's where they really struggle and end up going back to the job.
Yep. Well, and I just want to point this out too. We talk about savings as being one thing or one number. There may be situations that, your family has a different situation, or maybe your spouse isn't completely comfortable. Maybe you don't use your entire savings for your
Correct.
runway.
Yep.
So you can talk to your spouse and you can decide on a number that, they're okay with setting aside for part of your runway. But that way your family isn't in any danger of going into some financial stressful times if you set aside like a little nest egg that's just for family emergencies or for family purposes, as opposed to here's my amount in savings for my runway.
Yeah. Well, and so, we talked about it a little bit, but we actually put a whole course together called Find Your Freedom. And right now, like, eventually we're going to offer it for sale, like on its own as a standalone. But right now we've got it inside our Lifestyle Builders community.
Yep.
And, we've got people going through there, and we actually put this whole spreadsheet together all around that. And what's cool about it is it talks about you leaving your job, and then potentially your spouse leaving their job.
Mm-hmm.
And for most people, what they don't realize is that if you're the entrepreneur, you might be able to leave your job first, and then you're taking a step there, because then your spouse still likely has health insurance. They're still bringing in some income, and then you can work on building your business income up to then allow them to leave.
Yeah.
Maybe your spouse never wants to leave, and they'll just keep having their money. But actually going through and figuring this out is then so powerful to then know what you're working towards and what needs to happen.
And you just brought up a good point that we didn't mention yet, was how will things change if you leave your job? So we've got your runway, we've got your income and your expenses, and then your savings amount. But one of the things that we talk about in the Find Your Freedom course is some of the things that people commonly don't think about or don't know when they go to leave their job that can then bite them in the butt down the line, which includes, this is a big one, health insurance.
Oh my gosh.
So if your spouse does not have health insurance through their job and it's through yours, and you leave, that means you are going to be paying for your own health insurance if they don't have the option to pick it up and through their job.
Yeah.
So that's a huge, huge expense, especially if you're a family. You have to pay for family insurance that normally you don't think about because it's coming out of your paycheck, and you don't see it because it comes out of your paycheck before your paycheck comes to you.
And your company might actually be paying half of that.
Exactly.
For example, we pay over $1,000 a month for our health insurance. Now, when you were working a job, you depends
on the job, but most jobs pay a good portion.
But
of your insurance premium.
they might be paying half of that premium for you. So if you're working a job, you're only paying $500 of that, and it's coming out before your paycheck ever comes to you. But guess what? Like, when you go full time, you've then got to figure that out, and that's a huge thing that if you forget to calculate that into things, that could drastically reduce your runway.
Yeah. The other one, taxes. Most people don't know that there's this little sneaky tax called self-employment tax.
Yep.
When you are an employee, you don't pay that.
Well, your company pays half of it.
Your company pays it.
Correct. But you have to pay the whole thing because you're the company because it's your business, and then you're also the employee because you're a part of that.
Yep.
So that's the thing. I mean, there's a lot of advantages to being an entrepreneur, but there's also these things that, like, those two right there, I mean, that could cripple your chances of being able to leave if you don't plan and understand those. And
Yep.
those should be incorporated into your freedom number.
Well, and not even just self-employment tax, but when it comes time to actually
To
file your
pay
taxes, most people don't set enough aside. And if you don't know that you actually made a profit in your business, you're going to owe on your taxes.
Absolutely.
So what are you going to do then if you haven't put any money aside, and if your family doesn't have savings you can tap into, then you can put yourself in a lot of trouble. And that's honestly, that's something most of us only think about once a year. Like, oh,
Yeah.
I got to file my taxes. Oh crap, I owe the government money. Now what do I do?
Well, I was gonna say, so there's a blog post that I wrote called, what a 6-figure business really looks like. And one of the things I have in there, I'll link to it in our show notes page, is actually a comparison of the money coming in from your paycheck and then the money coming in if you own your business, and how the taxes and stuff break out. Because to your point, your taxes typically get taken out of your paycheck every paycheck.
Yeah.
But as an entrepreneur, if you don't set that money aside, you could be in a tough situation at the end of the year when you owe the government money for taxes and you spent that.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll link to that in the show notes. And then that actually leads to, I guess, the final thing we'll talk about here, and then we'll wrap this up, is the money you bring in as a business owner is different than the money you bring in from your paycheck.
Correct.
And so we'll give you guys just a quick hack here to kind of figure that out. Here's another misconception people have. They say, well, I only need to bring in $4,000 a month to cover my expenses, so my business needs to bring $4,000 in. Nope, that's so far off.
Yep.
In order for you to take $4,000 out of your business, we'll just use a quick rule of thumb: double that, and that's what your business has to bring in. So if you need to bring $4,000 home for you to cover your expenses, your business likely has to bring in $8,000. Now, maybe it's a little bit less, maybe it's $6,000, or maybe it's a little bit more. But Mike Michalowicz actually has a book called Profit First.
Yeah, I was gonna say we'll do another episode all around,
and we'll dive
profit
deep
first,
into
but
that.
basically, yes, your business needs to make double what you actually need to bring home in income.
Yeah, because-
based on his numbers.
Well, I was gonna say, so basically what he says, if your business is bringing in under $250,000 a year, this is how your money breaks out. 50% of that should go to you. So that's the money you take home.
Owners pay.
Owners pay. Then 5% should go to you as the business owner as profit. Then 15% you should be putting aside to pay taxes, so you don't get into that scenario we just talked about of owing the government money and then not having it. And then your remaining 30% should be for business expenses. So like we said, that $4,000 that your business brings in, likely that means you're only bringing $2,000 home. So part of this whole thing is, once you figure out your freedom number, the next step is then saying, okay, how big of a business do I have to build, and what does that business have to look like to then enable me to take the right amount of money out of it for me to pay my expenses.
Yes.
And that's another common point that people run into, is they don't really know what that number is or what that business has to look like. And then they end up not doing the right activities to build that type of business.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at, if you've already started a business and you're trying to do this, you've got to go back and look at the different types of offerings that you have, if it's product versus services. If you've already grown it to a certain point, how much time did that take you, and how much more time is it going to take you to grow it further, depending on the tasks you're doing and how you're modeling your business. Maybe it won't take you as much time because you figured everything out and now you just need to make it do more of that. Maybe it's going to take you more time because you don't actually know how you got to the point you're at now. Now you've got to go back and figure out, how did I make this work so that I can do more of it?
Yep.
And then, can that business that you've chosen ultimately grow enough to make you the amount of income you need, or are you going to need to diversify and do something else?
Correct. Yeah. So obviously there's a lot to consider, but once again, we'll talk about the Find Your Freedom course, because that's the whole reason we put this together. Like, we were legit looking around as we were trying to figure this out for ourselves.
Yeah. Tom
And
had to basically invent it.
yeah, like nobody talks about this. Everyone talks about the glamorous side of leaving your job, and like people post up all the time like, oh, I'm quitting my job, or oh, I screwed my 9 to 5. But what most people don't realize is that one, a lot of those people end up having to go back to a job, or their circumstances are different.
Or their circumstances
Yeah,
are
like
different.
if they have a spouse that
Who's
covers
making
all their
enough money.
expenses, like leaving their job, it's good. It's a step.
It just doesn't mean
but
the
it
same
doesn't
thing.
tell the whole story, right? So that's where, like,
Like me. Like when I left my job.
yeah, like we could have said, like, oh, you screwed your
It
9 to
wasn't
5
that big deal.
6 years ago.
You were covering all of our expenses
Yeah.
with your income. So my job was just the extra.
Yeah.
And we had a kid. So we made the choice like, oh, I'm going to leave my job to stay home and take care of our daughter. Otherwise, she would have been in daycare and all of my money would have been going to daycare.
Yeah. So I mean, the takeaway here, every person's circumstance is different, and why we put this course together is so that it guides you through the steps, so you can really figure out for your circumstance what are these numbers, and then what's the plan that works for you, so that as you're building your business, you're being very intentional and you're making sure that you build up the right amount of savings. You're making sure that you build the business to the right level so that you can actually leave. You can actually have that freedom and do it in a smart and responsible way.
Yeah. All right. So coming around to the homework time, my homework for you is going to be you figuring out your freedom number. So that means going home and sitting down and putting your budget together and figuring out how much money you have coming in and how much money is going out and where it's going.
Sweet. So my homework is going to be go and check out our Plan with Purpose course, because we've probably told you about this already and you said, I don't have to worry about that. But as you sit down to do Ariana's homework, it is so important to make sure that you really understand, what do you want your life to look like? Why are you doing all this? Because I'll be honest, if you guys have been listening, this is not easy to do, right? Like really, because as you go through this, especially with your spouse, things are going to come up, like your perspectives on money, having to sacrifice or maybe downgrade your lifestyle so that you can achieve this freedom sooner. There's a lot of things that are going to come up. And if you guys haven't gone through and really figured out, why are we doing this and what is that life we want to build, it's going to make this more difficult.
Yep.
So if you have done that, kudos. If not, go back and do that while you're doing this.
And we'll post up we'll post up that course on the show notes page, which is tomandariana.com/9. All right, you've got a book for us. What's on Tom's bookshelf today?
All right, this is a pretty sweet book. It's called The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And if you're looking at it, it's a pretty thick book.
Pretty thick book.
This is an interesting book. So the title is The 4-Hour Workweek. And a lot of people think, oh, so I'll read that book and it'll tell me how I can work in 4 hours a week. It's not the reality. But what is cool about this book, this is one that a lot of people talk about. And basically it changed the paradigm for a lot of people. So most of us are on, and actually let me tell the subtitle is Escape Your 9 to 5, Live Anywhere, and Join the New Rich. And basically what Tim Ferriss talks about here is that the traditional path of delaying satisfaction until retirement is what most of us are on. But why wait 45 years to then enjoy life? He says the new rich, in the way that people look at things today, are actually how do I build, what life do I want, and how do I start living that today? So this book kind of walks through a lot of different stuff. Some of it's a little bit dated, but the biggest thing I want you guys to get out of this is understanding that you don't have to wait till retirement to live that life. And if you go through and do some of the stuff that we're talking about in this show, and you read this book, it's actually going to change your mindset to say, well, how do I live the life I want today? And how do I make sure I make intentional decisions with my money so that I can do more of that now instead of waiting 45 years until you hit retirement?
Mm-hmm. And then we've got, actually, Tom has got a blog post that kind of breaks down all the things we've talked about. An epic blog post called Find Your Freedom. And it really breaks down. I know we talked about a lot of stuff today. We threw a lot of number words and random things out there. So if you're trying to follow along and you're like, holy crap, this is way too much information, go and just check out the blog post. And that way you can really read it in sections and you can take it piece by piece, and then turn around and go implement on it. So we'll put the link to that in the show notes page.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it took a lot of work to put that together, and it took us years to kind of figure out. But if you're looking
years,
but if you're looking to leave your job, like, this is the step-by-step of what you guys should be doing to really be able to make that a reality for you.
Yeah. All right, you guys, it's been another great episode with Tom and Ariana, your hosts and lifestyle builders.
And as always, I want you guys to remember that it's your life, your business, your way. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Are you frustrated by a lack of momentum in your business? Do you want real-time guidance and support from seasoned entrepreneurs who really care about your results? If you're nodding your head or awkwardly shouting yes in public somewhere, then we invite you to join Lifestyle Builders, a mentorship program designed to meet you where you are and give you strategic and custom guidance so you can build the business you need for the life you crave. You can find out more at joinlifestylebuilders.com.
Your life, your business, your way. Join Family Entrepreneur Life. Join Family Entrepreneur